Jim Mercier of Racine, Wisconsin, is a longtime collector. Started out with beer stuff and Breweriana, and he's been so gracious, he and his wife, to allow us to come into his basement, which is completely off the charts with cool historic memorabilia. So we're going to sit here and learn a little bit about Jim's life, love of collecting, and what was the bug or the seed that planted. Do you remember the first thing? Or
Well, I was always interested in Breweriana. My father came from a small town in Rice Lake, and it was the brewery there was Brunig's, and I always had an interest in beer. I guess even at that young age, I never drank it, but I just had an interest in the signs. On the way to Rice Lake, we would go every year. The highway or the back ways that we took just loaded with old beer signs. Almost every mile had a beer sign of some brewery. But that sort of stuck in my mind. And back in the early 70s, I started picking up a few beer cans. And I would buy a lot of them around here. At that time, I worked in Chicago, so I would hit the liquor stores and I would buy every single can that I could. As time went on, I sort of expanded into more Breweriana. So at the time when I was collecting everything, my parents' basement was loaded with old beer crates and signs and memorabilia like that. When we had this house built, everything came over here, including the crates and the signs, which I added to constantly because I was still interested in that stuff. But it got to a point where I started collecting more items from my hometown of Racine. So my interest in Breweriana was sort of waning. At the same time, my interest in Racine memorabilia was gaining more traction. At one point, I didn't want to get any more Breweriana stuff, so what I just did was just leave everything here with the signs. But I did get rid of all my beer cans, and I got rid of all my beer wooden cases, and I think I had probably about 120 of them, but they just took up so much room. When I got rid of them, I was able to gain a whole wall, and of course with that extra space, up went all my Racine signs and other things from Racine where I had no room before. So it was a blessing in disguise. The beer cans, believe it or not, paid for part of this house. That's why I'm always tied to my beer collecting past, because I live in a house that was partially paid for by selling my cans. Now each of my signs has an interesting story. They represent going to trade shows in the Chicago or Milwaukee, word of mouth, antique stores. But back in the early 70s when I started collecting signs, they were pretty plentiful. Not too many people were involved in the collecting end of it, so it was wide open. There was a sale in McWanago, a flea market. There were 4 a year. It was loaded with old beer signs, and I could have bought a lot more, and I just bought one because I didn't know of anybody else collecting except myself. So I just bought one. I could kick myself now. What they're going for, I paid $25 for each one. The guy had 3 different ones, and I bought them all for $25 a piece. And now, ask anybody what the value of those signs are now.
And we're not just going to gloss over those beer cans that easily, too, because in the day, I believe it was Juan ads that you discovered, and it was a one-of-a-kind find from, was it Continental Can out in California?
California, yep. I took out Juan ads. I remember what my the ad was. Wanted old beer cans, and then with my phone number or address. I think it was my address. And I got a lot of replies. I got some good cans from Milwaukee, but the best one was the California collection. 55 mint condition cone tops, of which many were even undiscovered, and they were all in mint condition. And the guy wanted $100 a piece, $5,500 altogether. I was living with my parents, Imagine telling my parents I want to take out $5,500 from my hard-earned savings to buy beer cans. Well, they just went through the roof and thought I was crazy. But I convinced them that I know the value. So I did it anyway, with their objection, of course. And I got the cans, and that really added to my collection with the addition of those CONETOP cans. And all of a sudden, a lot of other beer can collectors heard about it through the grapevine, and they came over to see them. And of course, I was offered money for them right then and there. Big time collectors. I remember a few. One from Chicago, I think his name was Dave Peck, if I'm not mistaken. But he was pretty well off, and he wanted those cans in the worst way, and a couple other guys wanted them as well. And
Ken White, was he?
Oh, he was another one, right? Ken White. There was a guy named Jim too. I forgot his last name. And
but we need to clarify this. These were the first cone tops ever made. Low profile cone tops, inverted rib, and those were from probably 35 to 36 era.
Exactly.
Era. And
right.
One of the ones that I remember, because I'm from Minnesota, was the pink Cato cone top, and it's always been disputed whether that was a paint scheme or a misprint, but to make a beer can metallic pink, there was a red lion in there, Apex associated, many of just cans that there's truly one known example. And you're right, Jim, back in the day, people, rather than a long distance phone call which could ring up by the minute, and you would always be cognizant of your time, but you would get letters in the mail, and trading was done through the mail too back in those days.
Yes. Other brands I think were Ambassador, from an Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Tahoe, a beautiful can, just gorgeous. It showed the lake. And again, these were all in pristine mint condition. And when word spread, I mean, I was getting phone calls and letters, and and people wanted to, make me offers and everything. And I kept saying, no, these are in my collection. And eventually, I became good friends with Dave Stark, who was a big collector of beer cans. And at one point, he always said, if you ever want to sell someday, let me know. And I kept saying, and one day he said, Jim, I know you don't want to sell, but I'm going to give you X amount of dollars for these if you want to sell. And I was so blown away by that amount, I pretty much said sold. So, and that became a start of a good friendship with Dave. He brought him over to his basement, and we were there quite often. My wife and I, they'd invite us for dinner, and so I know they went to a good home. But eventually he sold them. I don't know what he sold them for, but like I was mentioning to Barry, I would see some of those cans for sale for $20,000, even $35,000 for one can. One can, $35,000, and that was mine. So, and if I sold them for that amount, I wouldn't be living in this house. I'd be living in a castle someplace, bordering Lake Michigan or whatever. So it's funny, but I was happy with the amount that I got, and I know they went to a good home.
And with a lot of the larger format porcelain signs, I mean, in the old days, you would see those, not a lot of collectors had the wall space, and they'd often be $100 or $200, and they weren't as coveted as they are today. But hopefully later in this tour of Jim's beautiful home and museum, you'll see some of these amazing, I think now would be a good segue for the Brunigs neon. There's a double-sided Brunigs neon from Rice Lake.
Yes. Again, that's from Rice Lake, my father's hometown. I remember going there when we went on vacation every year. My dad would always take us to the brewery. They had a spigot inside. You can walk in off the street and have a free beer at the brewery. And everybody knew everybody at the in Rice Lake. And my dad was good friends with one of the Brunigs. and I would spend time there as well. I think that generated a lot of interest in my beer collecting days as well. I would take out ads at that point looking for, the cans were gone at this time, so I would take out ads, and this was before my interest in Racine's history, wanted old beer signs. And I got quite a few replies, but one I got from an older lady in Rice Lake, and it was in her garage, and she sent a picture of it. So I called her up and made a deal on the phone. I forgot what I paid for it. Rented a small truck, and I sent my dad and my uncle, and they made a special trip to Rice Lake to pick up the sign. When I got it, it needed some more neon work apparently. So as I was explaining to Barry, a good friend of my parents was a guy named Mike Prohaska, who owned a sign shop in Racine. It's still there, and they're one of the biggest sign manufacturers in the area. He would restore all of my neons. Whenever I would get a neon sign, he'd be glad to bring it to his shop, put all neon, replace the neon that needed it, and he would even come here with his son and hang it up for me.
Is there another sign in your collection that involves unusual circumstances or luck, or that you kind of hold dear? That was a story that would be hard to top, but...
Well, I think every sign here that I purchased at one time has its unique story. I was mentioning the Leinenkugel sign. That's a double-faced porcelain. There's a lot of reproductions on that one, but I forgot what I paid for it. Let's say I paid $100 for it. I was so glad to get it, I got a speeding ticket on the way back, so I think it cost me another $125 added to the original cost. So that sign costed me a lot more than what I had bargained for. The one right behind us here too, the Cream City. My wife used to work for a company, Piggly Wiggly, and somebody that she worked with knew that I collected beer signs. And this person said that, hey, did you know that there's a beer sign that located in Sheboygan, I guess, and asked me if I was interested. I said, well, what is it? Probably some, old Milwaukee or whatever.
Plastic.
Yeah, plastic or whatever. But then he said, no, it's the Cream City porcelain. I said, my gosh, you've got to be kidding. He was kind enough to do all the arranging for me. I think he sent it on one of the meat trucks or something, if I'm not mistaken. So the postage was virtually non-existent. But can you imagine getting a call that somebody has this sign here? Again, that's porcelain, double-faced. I was just blown away when I first saw that sign.
And have you ever had, I've found too, sometimes I always find you're better off asking the person what they feel is a fair price, because I've had my offer either shock, in which they say, well, if it's worth that much, oh my gosh, and that can work against you, or
absolutely,
if they've seen some crazy auction price somewhere, well, and they don't realize that's a circumstance of two people in that instance.
That's right. It's always best to have them make the initial contact with the price. Otherwise, like Barry said, if you offer too much, they're going to think, oh my gosh, it's worth that much? I better do some checking. It's going to be worth even more. If you offer too little, you run the risk of offending them, and they might say, well, get out of here,
Yep,
so
you cheapskate.
Yeah, you're right in the middle. But that's all changed now with shows like American Pickers, because or eBay, because all of a sudden, if somebody has an old sign, it's worth thousands of dollars. Look what they pay for on American Pickers, or look what somebody's signs are going for on eBay. I think destroyed a lot of the fairness of getting signs back then. The good old days was before American Pickers and before eBay. No one knew the value. But now, thanks to shows like that, everybody thinks they have this wonderful treasure that's worth thousands of dollars, especially when it comes to old signs.
And the so-called rusty gold, a lot of times I look at that and just like, that I've thrown away better signs.
Yes, that's right.
Well, what I was going to ask too, Jim, what did you do for your career and your day job that would allow you to travel like to Chicago and such? What?
Well, that was traveling was pretty much on weekends and that. I worked in production control for J.I. Case, and then I retired from Rude Lighting, which is now Cree. I was there for almost 30 years. You know, I would go to different shows. There was always an advertising show, and I think it was Rosemont, Illinois, 2 of them a year, spring and fall. I'd be there for every single one, usually the first one in line, waiting to get in. I went with my son and my dad and my uncle. The 4 of us used to go, and then we'd all scatter, and they would look for stuff for me. Yeah, those were the good old days too, before American Pickers and shows like that, when you can get stuff relatively inexpensive. To this day, I still go to flea markets. There's one coming up actually next weekend in Elkhorn, and that one is just geared for antiques and collectibles. I'm staying away now from the other flea markets because most of that stuff you buy there now is just junk. And I mean junk. It's rare to find something unique. Find something at these other flea markets is hard because the dealers get there the day before and they'll pick the other dealers for the good stuff. Again, the only place I would go to now is Elkhorn, because that deals exclusively in antiques and collectibles. But there again, a lot of my competition is there. I try to get there early, one of the first ones in there. You know, just so many people who collect what I do now, Racine memorabilia, that it's hard to get anything good.
And I often say I just need one showmaker, like coming out here to Milwaukee, and we're out here for the NABA, National Association of Breweriana Collectors, their national convention, their 50th. It was first held in Milwaukee, and now this is the 50th. So I often just, if I leave the show with one collection piece, that's a worthwhile trip for me, because you're right, it is, especially as you become more advanced as a collector, to find something, even an upgrade is nice if you upgrade something significantly, but to find something that goes in your collection, that makes a show worthwhile for me.
But,
And hopefully we'll see as we capture a lot of Jim's signs, you'll see some of the signs that we've talked about, but this is to be invited down here. Jim had just sent me a few snapshots of his basement, and it has, I like to think I have a vivid imagination, but this has exceeded anything I could have ever dreamed of. It is everywhere you turn, there's history and unique signage and memorabilia, and thanks to collectors that had the foresight and were at it in the 70s. I mean, all this stuff can be preserved and enjoyed. That's what I always say too. We're just caretakers of it now, and you hope that someone else appreciates it when we're gone.
Exactly my feelings too, Barry. We're just caretakers of these signs and other related historical items for a short period of time. After we're gone, we hope that somebody else will enjoy it as much as we did, and hopefully it's going to be preserved for a long, long time. The days when I think maybe our parents, when they were done with something, they threw it out in the garbage.
Yeah.
I lost a lot of good things that way, my train set and whatever, and
baseball card collection.
Baseball
maybe.
cards, yeah, it would just throw it out. But what we're trying to do is save this for future generations so they can enjoy it like we do.